Hello, this is the Conditions Report, Episode 7, The Weight of the Written Word. Hello, and welcome back. I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time joining me, here's what this show is. The Conditions Report is a weekly series where we read the sky of policing the way a pilot reads the weather. Every episode follows the same structure. We start with the statutory climate. That's the constitutional and statutory baseline that we operate inside. Then we move to the legal front. That's where real cases stress test the rules and show us the edges. And after that, we shift to leadership. That's the maxim that you can carry into the field, the locker room, and the briefing room where it actually matters. When we finish with an extended forecast, that's the practical week ahead application that you can use on the street tonight. The idea behind the show is simple. Policing is an environment, and that environment changes fast. The legal and cultural atmosphere moves. If you cannot read the sky, you'll get caught out in the storm. The goal here is clarity. You see the system, understand the rules, make decisions that stand up inside the courtroom and inside the community. The Conditions Report is part of the Forecast, a project by Forecast Securities Group, LLC, the training and consulting company I founded. We help professionals in high-risk environments operate with legality, precision, and clarity. Before we begin, the disclaimer. This presentation is for educational purposes only. It is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, and I do not represent any agency, department, or government entity. I speak only on behalf of Forecast Securities Group, LLC, and if you're dealing with a real or actual case, consult a qualified attorney. Before we start tonight, I want to give a thank you to CalFIA, the California Force Instructors Association, for featuring the Conditions Report in their recent newsletter. CalFIA remains one of the most credible professional communities in the use of force world. Their site is filled with high-value research, courses, and insights from instructors who teach at the highest level of policing. Membership is $50 a year, and restrictions on who can join do apply, but if you're an instructor or trainer, check them out. They host an annual training conference, and their periodic newsletters are some of the best work being done in this profession. Now picture this. The noise is gone. The radio chatter fades. Suspect is down. The scene is stable. Your hands still remember the tremors that came with the decision you just made. It's over, except for it isn't. Because the last act of an event isn't the force you used. It's the report that you write about. The report will live longer than the bruise, the scar, or the case file. It will outlast the memory and stand on its own under a microscope of hindsight. The pen is not lighter than the weapon. It carries equal weight. One preserves life, the other preserves truth. All right, let's get into it. Tonight's episode is called The Weight of the Written Word. The use of force is the state's most serious power. When you raise a weapon in defense of life, you're exercising authority the public granted to you and only you. That authority is not just tactical, it's moral and constitutional. To end or even risk ending another human's life under the color of law is an immense responsibility. Every round, every strike, every command, and every restraint is a moment of government power focused through a single individual, you. The public has trusted you to traverse human rights on their behalf, and that trust requires precision not only in what you do, but in how you explain it. That explanation, the articulation of perception, fear, and decision, is not optional. It is the bridge between what you experienced and what the public can understand, and it's how legitimacy is either built or destroyed. Let's start with the statutory climate. The Fourth Amendment governs all use of force. It protects people from unreasonable seizures and sets the standard of objective reasonableness. That phrase means this: your decisions are measured not by perfection, but by what a reasonable officer would do, knowing what you knew in the same moment under the same conditions. Then comes 42 United States Code, Section 1983, the Civil Rights Act. It reads, in part, every person who, under the color of any statute, subjects any citizen to the deprivation of rights secured by the Constitution shall be liable to the party injured. That single line is the legal bridge between what you do and how you justify it. It turns words into evidence. It also means that the writing you do afterwards is not just paperwork. It's the official record of how the government power was used against another human being. That is the foundation. Now let's move on to the legal front. The case is Deorle v. Rutherford, Ninth Circuit, 2001, On September 9, 1996, in Butte County, Richard Deorle, a man suffering from hepatitis C and side effects of interferon, consumed alcohol, became distraught, and threatened to end his life. His wife fled the home with their children and called 911 for help. When officers arrived, he refused to let them enter without a warrant, but he did allow his family to leave safely. He shouted, cursed, and demanded to be shot. He held and dropped several objects on command: a wooden board with nails and a hatchet and a crossbow. He never charged officers. He never struck anyone. He was emotionally unwell, but consistently responsive to direction. More than a dozen officers arrived. Roadblocks were set up. An SRT team was deployed. Negotiators were en route. One of those officers, Deputy Rutherford, was armed with a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with beanbag rounds. He watched Deorle from a position of cover for several minutes. Deorle, still shouting, walked towards Rutherford, not running, not sprinting, but walking. The deputy decided that when Deorle reached a certain tree, roughly 30 feet away, he would fire. He did not give a warning, and he did not issue a command to stop. When Deorle crossed that point, Rutherford fired one beanbag round aimed at the torso. It struck Deorle in the face, shattering his orbital bone and destroying his left eye. The Ninth Circuit would later rule that the force was excessive, and the court noted that Deorle had obeyed every command and that negotiators were on the way, and that there was time for a warning. The court said, even less lethal force carries a significant risk of serious injury and may only be used when a strong governmental interest compels it, and when feasible after a clear warning. That line is now a permanent part of the Ninth Circuit doctrine on use of force, but what matters most for this discussion is how the officer articulated his perception. His report said that Deorle advanced aggressively and that he posed an immediate threat, and that the deputy fired one less lethal round to stop this advance. That single paragraph told the story of feeling, not facts. It did not show what the officer saw, how far he was, what cues triggered the fear, or why the shot at that moment was necessary. The court read the language and found emotion, not evidence. Now imagine if that same event had been written with clear, force science-informed articulation. At approximately 1945, I was positioned behind cover about 40 feet from the suspect's front porch. I had been briefed earlier that he was suicidal and had dropped multiple objects on command and had made statements asking officers to shoot him. He exited the residence, yelling, and began walking towards me at a steady, uninterrupted pace, approximately 1 step per second. His hands were visible. When he reached roughly 25 feet, his shoulders dropped, and his right elbow flared away from his torso, movement consistent with a waistband draw. I shouted, "Stop, do not move." There was no response. I knew that at that distance, an average adult could close the gap in less than 2 seconds, and that human reaction time studies showed perception to reaction delayed around half a second. Believing that if he continued, I would be forced into a lethal decision at contact distance, I fired one beanbag round aimed at the lower torso in an attempt to de-escalate. The round struck higher than intended, and once he fell, I ceased using force and requested medical aid. That report reads differently because it speaks in time, distance, physiology, and fear. It shows that the officer perceived what he knew from training and what he saw in that moment, and that's how he decided. It replaces adjectives with measurements. It turns uncertainty into data. The difference is everything. Force science research has shown that under stress, perception narrows. The brain reduces input to perceive focus, and auditory exclusion dulls the sound. Tunnel vision compresses depth, and time slows and memory fractures. Reaction time research shows that from stimulus to movement, even a trained officer needs between half a second and 7/10 of a second to respond. A person 25 feet away can reach you in under 2 seconds. These are the mechanics of danger that must be translated into language. When your report captures those realities, you're not just defending yourself, you're teaching the truth of human performance under pressure. Deorle remains as a reminder that tactics and articulation cannot be separated. The court said officers had time, distance, and options, and they escalated anyway. They tested a suicidal man with a barking dog and then shot before negotiators arrived. That was not a failure of courage, it was a failure of patience. A warrior's discipline is not measured by only action, but also by restraint. The best warriors understand that every decision is also a communication to the public that trusts them to act only when necessary. Which brings us to leadership. Force wins the moment, words win the war. That line describes the two halves of the same profession. The first half is what happens in the seconds, the movement and the sound, the shot. The second half lasts for years. It's the interviews, the transcripts, the public judgment. Force ends the danger, but writing explains it. And when the explanation fails, legitimacy can collapse. Writing is not just paperwork. It is a continuation of the same discipline that governs the use of force. It is the act of clarity under stress. A professional understands that the job is not finished when the suspect is in custody. It's finished when the event is recorded truthfully and clear enough for anyone outside that scene to understand. When we write about force, we are describing the intersection between the state authority and human rights. The public has given us power to take freedom, use violence, and in rare cases, to take life. That is not a privilege, it's a responsibility that demands an explanation equal to the gravity of the act itself. When we cross into another person's rights, we owe the public a clear account of why it was lawful, necessary, and proportionate. That explanation must come from facts, not just feelings. Fear should be acknowledged, but not as an emotion. It must be presented as an observation. What triggered it? How did training and experience translate that perception into action? And when fear is written as data, it builds an understanding. When it's written as panic, it builds doubt. Leaders have to model this standard. The most effective supervisors read officers' reports with the same seriousness they would read an after action from a major incident. They ask about distance, lighting, timing, and commands. They treat writing as a professional skill, not a clerical one. Every report is a record of government force. It should be reviewed with the gravity that responsibility deserves. We train endlessly to control the body under stress. We must also train just as rigorously to control the narrative afterwards. The mind that can slow time in a fight must also slow memory on paper. That takes presence, mentorship, and repetition. It's not as glamorous, but it is what separates warriors from reactionaries. Force wins the moment, words win the war. The moment you understand that, you begin to see the report as not an obligation, but as an act of professionalism. It shows how you preserve the truth of what actually happened when every camera angle and headline failed to capture it in totality. If the same call happened today, the outcome would most certainly look differently. After Scott v. Smith, Ninth Circuit, our legal atmosphere has shifted. Courts now give greater consideration to mental health, warnings, and proportionality, and duty to slow things down. The focus is no longer on ending a standoff quickly, but on preserving life when time allows it. In the current climate, many of us would likely walk away from a call like Deorle's. We would contain, communicate, and wait. Some agencies might even completely disengage if the person is only a threat to himself and not to others. That's not avoidance, it's judgment. It reflects a professional understanding that force is not the only measure of control, and that the safest resolution sometimes is distance and patience. But none of that changes the lessons. The principle remains the same. The responsibility to articulate your perception and decision making does not fade because tactics have evolved. Whether you act or abstain, the record must still explain why. The forecast then remains consistent: high pressure, intense scrutiny, and no margin for lazy articulation. Our profession has matured, but the expectations have not softened. The duty to write clearly remains consistent. Honestly and with depth will always follow the duty to act lawfully and courageously. Force wins the moment, words win the war. Even as policies shift and the tactics adapt, the truth stands unchanged. And that's not to say that anything that happened in the case with Deorle was poor tactics or bad decision making, or that those officers did anything wrong. It's simply part of the learning equation that we must undertake as professionals. I'm Don, and this has been the Conditions Report, Episode 7. The weight of the written word. Be the calm in the storm, the clarity in confusion, and always influence the weather.